الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
So today, we're going to go through a couple of the things in more detail that we talked about last week. If you remember, we discussed like a few weeks ago what are the obligatory parts of a prayer, right? The whole idea is that once somebody becomes Muslim, the 5 daily prayers become obligatory upon them. And whether you were born into Islam or you're just kind of building a relationship with your faith, or you're exploring Islam as a religion, or you're a recent convert, or you converted a while ago, but you haven't built a kind of sound relationship with the prayer, you're just starting to get into it. The obligatory parts in the legal school of thought that we're looking at, the Hanafi school, are just what's written here, right? And you have like very little Arabic that you would have to do at a minimum. But the idea is that as you're going through this, you start to go also and learn the other components of the prayer. And this isn't the whole list exhausted. You can come in if you want. Yeah, I can sound. Or you don't have to. No, okay. Yeah, change your mind. It's fine. Yeah. So the second layer of it are what are necessary acts. And for the first month of this session, early in the summer, we did a really deep dive into the first chapter of the Quran, Surah Fatiha, that isn't an obligatory part of the prayer, but a necessary part. And we talked about its meaning and what goes into it. And today we're going to look at what's called the tashahhud. This is the second half of a list of necessary acts. We're going to look at the tashahhud, which is a necessary act in each sitting of the prayer that you want to start to also memorize and build a relationship with. But we aren't going to do, similar to what we did with the first chapter, Fatiha. It's not just about the translation, because a lot of language is not language that we utilize so much day to day, as much as it's about learning the meaning of it. Do you know what I mean? And it becomes a challenge in building quality and focus in a prayer when even if the Arabic is not something we're familiar with, or the translation is just words that we've rotely memorized, but we're not connecting to the meaning of it. And so we want to get into the nuance and the meaning of the word. So we're going to look at the tashahhud today and kind of go through each word one by one. And so this is what you're reciting as a necessary component, right? As you're learning the prayer, in the course of the prayer, you're going to do these obligatory things, but you want to add elements to it, right? So people should have started to learn the first chapter. If you kind of joined at a later time, you could find it on our podcast, on our YouTube channel, those sessions that you missed. I'm also happy to sit with people one-on-one if you missed those sessions, but we went into it pretty detailed so that you could kind of resonate with the meaning a little bit more. We want to do the same thing here in terms of this part that's considered a necessary part. So this is in every sitting of the prayer, right? In your prayer, it's a 2-cycle, 3-cycle, or 4-cycle prayer. And if it's a 2-cycle prayer, you have one sitting in it. The sitting is not like you're sitting in a chair the way you all are, but the sitting is, I have a standing position, then there's a bowing position, prostrating position, and then you're in a sitting position that's essentially like kneeling. And in the course of the sitting, when you stay seated, you're not just coming up and then going down between prostrations, but you're actually sitting in this kneeling position in the second cycle of a 2-cycle prayer, or the second and third cycles of a 2 or 3-cycle prayer, or the second and fourth cycles of a 2 or 4-cycle prayer. Does that make sense? Right? And you don't have to kind of stay with all those because we haven't talked about those so much in detail. But when you're in this position, this is what you're going to be reciting in that part of the prayer. It's called the tashahhud, and you can hear like it's got similar sounding letters to shahada, for example, right? Which is what somebody does when they convert to Islam. They're saying the shahada, the bare testimony of faith, right? That's what makes somebody Muslim. Does anybody already know this, like memorized it already? Yeah? Great. So it's good to even just have a revision to kind of understand what the words mean, and we're going to break it down. I thought it'd be a little bit easier than me writing in my chicken scratch handwriting that a few of you have told me that you can't read what I write on the board, that we'll use a little bit clearer of text. This is the English, Arabic. This is the Arabic, the English translation, and at the top is a transliteration. And so we'll do it piece by piece. This first word is, Arabic is read from right to left. So you're going to look at the transliteration, left to right, but just breaking it down word by word. So the first word says, at-tahiyatu. That word in Arabic, it has a root for what means life in Arabic, right? This will get translated as greetings. And so what happens if does anybody speak Arabic in the room or know anybody that's Arab that talks to you in Arabic? Yeah. So some of the ways like Arabs greet each other, they'll say hayakallah, right? The word haya means life, right? So, may God give you life, right? Hayakumullah, may God give all of you life, right? And we talked about this in a previous class, but the way language is built, words are built in Arabic, are through shared root letters. The majority of words have trilateral roots, like Islam, Muslim, Salam, all has the root Salama. You can see a kind of thread there, the words that are derived from it. Some words have like 2-letter roots, some have 4. It's a rarity. So this word, at-tahiyat, is the plural of the word for greetings. And one of the ways that people used to greet each other back in the day, they'd say hayakumullah, or even today, right? They say hayakallah, right? Like, may God give you life. So what's happening here is that this is getting paired now with God, with Allah. So it says this thing of greetings is for Allah. And it's an interesting kind of construct because you're essentially greeting Allah in this way. And one would ask the question, well, what does this mean, like to greet the divine? Like, what is one really doing here? There's a couple of different ways that this is understood. There is an individual who tries to figure this out. What does it mean to greet the divine? And he goes to somebody and asks the question, like, what does it mean to greet the divine? And this person says, this is a word for, like, barakah, blessing. And then that person says to them, well, like, what does barakah mean then, right? And the person says, this is all I know, right? Like, I don't know anything. Don't go talk to somebody else. And so he goes and speaks to one of the more senior students of Abu Hanifa, whose school of thought we're looking at here, the Hanafi school of thought. This is like the rulings that we're taking for the prayer from that school. And this person's name is Muhammad Shaybani. And he says to this individual, like, what does this mean in terms of like greetings, etc.? And gets an answer also, but not one that really gives so much insight. And then he goes and speaks to another person that is the namesake and founder of another like school of thought in Sunni Islam. That's the Shafi school. And when he asks Imam Shafi, who is not just somebody who knows like Islamic law and theology and Arabic grammar, etc., but also is known to be a poet. And the individual asked Imam Shafi, like, I went and talked to these other people, and they didn't really like give me too much of a detailed answer as to why one would be giving greetings to the divine, right? And Imam Shafi says, well, you should be asking me, like, I'm a poet, And he can give you a different kind of vantage point and framework on it. And he says this greeting is essentially not like a greeting the way you would say hello to someone, but you want to think about it in terms of the essence of what you're doing in this prayer. And you're giving a sense of greeting that is the kind of like greeting that you would give to someone if you walked into a court of a king, right? At-tahiyat is invoking an idea of that level of magnitude of greeting. You know, when you walk into a space and you have a notion of who it is that you're greeting with that level of authority, right? So these are kind of sense of greetings that understand the majesty of the divine, you know, that you're beginning in this place and saying that that's the mode of engagement that I am giving this greeting of. Does that make sense? At-tahiyatu. When a lot of people pronounce this word, they just ally all of the letters together, right? So they say like at-tahiyat, but you can't read the Arabic. I don't know why I'm pointing to it, because a lot of you can't. But see this little W-looking thing in Arabic? That's called a shadda, right? The word for like severe in Arabic is shadid. So when you have this, it's essentially connecting to the letter before it, and it also has its own syllable, right? So it's not at-tahiyat, it's at-tahiyat. Right? You're saying hiyat, not at-tahiyat. Do you hear the difference? Yeah. Right? It's elided in, and then it has it also. So that's why in the English here, it says at-tahiyat. But the tah is going to end with that ha, and the next syllable is he. Does it make sense? Yeah. And it's connecting it now, lillah. So at-tahiyatu lillahi, that these greetings in particular are for Allah. They're for the divine, right? In Arabic, there's different perspectives on like this word Allah. Most people would say this is like the proper name of God in Islam, and there's no breakdown of it. Some would say it's just an elision of the definitive article al, which is the, and then ilah, like the God, Allah, right? But it's now in this like place where these unique kind of majestic greetings, the way that you would engage in this kind of scope, this is a unique like way of kind of centering somebody in understanding I'm speaking to the divine. Does that make sense? Another thing you can derive from this is, you know, when you walk into a place, if you have good etiquette, you're going to greet people, right? Whether you know them or not. My kids are 7 and 10 since they were really little. I've said to them, you walk onto a bus, you say hello to the bus driver, right? You say thank you when you're getting off of the bus. And it makes a big difference, right? We got stuck in this downpour of rain some time ago, and we were trying to walk on 3rd Avenue back to our apartment, and an entire bus stopped for us in the middle of the street. And my son and my daughter are looking at me, and the bus driver's like, get on the bus. And it's a bus driver who was not stopping at a bus stop, had no reason to stop, and also was going against like MTA policy, just stopping in the middle of the street. But somebody we say hello to every day. And he saw us because likely we see him. Do you understand? But God doesn't need for you to see God in that sense, right? Like the extension of a greeting there is not in that mode of interaction. There's no anthropomorphizing of God in Islam. So what this is also alluding to is a sense of just etiquette at the end of it. You don't just do things when you have to do them, but you do them with a sense of mindfulness of like, what is good character? What is what we call like good adab in Arabic, like good etiquette. Do you get what I mean? So the notion isn't like, well, you don't have to greet God because what does that even mean? But the understanding is back to the one who is doing it, you want to like have good etiquette in every space that you can have etiquette. And you treat people like in a way based off of who you are, not who they are. Does that make sense? So if 100 people pass the security guard downstairs and don't say anything, you, when you're leaving, you say thank you, right? And you extend a farewell, right? You see people who nobody's asking them in the restaurant how their day is going. You walk into places and there's one person sitting. It makes no sense. I used to own a restaurant down the street. I own a butchery up the street, and I walk into some of these businesses in Manhattan and there's one person working behind a counter. How's that person go to the bathroom? When does that person get to go and eat? Right? They're not notions that kind of pop in when we are in a consumer-driven society that centers the self egocentrically and is not necessarily aware of others in terms of where they're at. Do you get what I'm saying? So here too has a foundational principle in Islam that isn't a religion just about do's and don'ts and ritual, but a lot of it is about ethical conduct and good character. Does that make sense? At-tahiyatu lillah, that all the greetings, it's definitive, right? It's not just saying a greeting, but it's saying the greetings. And we're going to talk about the whole sentence in 3 minutes, but that's what that first word means, right? That the greetings are for God, right? Like these majestic kind of royal kind of greetings are for God. Was-salawat, this is the plural of the word salah, which we talked about some weeks ago. These are like your prayers that you do, these 5 daily prayers. Wat-tayyibat, as well as all things that are good and pure, right? Anything that has like goodness to it. There's different kind of perspectives on what these 3 words mean altogether. So some people will say the word tahiyat, right, in the beginning, at-tahiyatu, is referring to all forms of worship that are relevant to like verbalized worship. If you engage in litanies, you engage in recitation of the Quran, you engage in anything that is expressed or spoken, those are things that are all for the divine. The salawat is referring to all forms of worship that have a physicality to it, like your daily prayers. You're standing, you're bowing, you're kneeling, you're prostrating. The tayyibat are in reference to forms of worship that have some element of financial kind of mechanism to it, right? Your charity, etc., these kinds of things. But it's rooted in this sense that all of these things are only for God. These things are only for the divine. Does that make sense? If you break it down more, it's also giving an indication that anything that has goodness to it in general, anything that has some type of beneficial purpose, I'm reaffirming this idea in this statement that I don't worship anything else. I am a worshiper of the divine. I'm not a worshiper of the world. I'm not a worshiper of my physical beauty. I'm not a worshiper of wealth. But this entity, God, is the one that is the only entity worthy of these things from me. And I'm making that affirmation through this invocation in these words. At-tahiyatu lillahi was-salawatu wat-tayyibatu. In the prophetic tradition, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is teaching people this, there's a man who's a companion of the Prophet. His name is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And what he does is he turns to this man, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and when he's teaching him, he takes Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's hand and he holds his hand in his hand like this. And he teaches him these words. It's a very intimate exchange, right? You want to contextualize it in the nature of the words that are being spoken. It's not somebody with a PowerPoint and this bright light kind of just lecturing, but with a sense of gentleness and compassion. It's going from a heart to a heart that becomes the seat of how you connect to the divine. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, when he takes it from the Prophet like this, he says he then goes and teaches one of his students later in the same way and holds the person's hand, one hand between his hand. That person says, I teach somebody else like it in this way too, right? Does that make sense? So the entire pedagogy is rooted now in also demonstrating a proximity and intimacy that isn't about distancing, but in this sense that you have this unique kind of beautiful relationship with God individually. In Islam, it's a very pure monotheism. There's nothing between you and the divine. You have no mediator. No one is going to sanctify your prayer. Your prayer is as valuable as the person next to you. And so in that mode of an exchange, it's creating now a different opportunity for intimacy with the words that is not just being thrown, but being taught in a way that you're literally taking someone by the hand and saying, this is what you're going to say at this time, right? Think about, has anybody ever given you advice in this way, or spoken to you in this way, or shared something with you in this way? You know, when I take my kids and I bring them close to me, I'll put my arm around them, I'll hold them close, and I'll say things to them that are quite meaningful, right? My wife and I, when everyone's asleep and we're just talking about whatever it is, there's a difference if she's sitting on that side of the room and I'm sitting over here, right? Or if I'm seated and she's standing up, one of us is about to get yelled at and it's me, right? But when you're sitting now in close proximity with somebody and you can be in that way and you are looking at them face to face and you're saying, hey, in your prayer, this is what you're going to say at this point. It's giving you an insight into what the nature of these words are. You're not about to connect to a God that is distant from you, but you're going to connect to a God that is closer to you than your own jugular vein, is what our tradition says. A God that is not just watching you, but watching over you. A God that loves you more than a mother loves its child. A God that identifies himself from the very beginning to you as a nurturing God, a God that is caring for you, a God that is providing for you, the most merciful of those who show mercy. That's who you are greeting here. Make sense? That's in that first sentence. At-tahiyatu lillahi was-salawatu wa-tayyibatu. Right? This is what you're saying. These beautiful greetings are for God, as are our prayers, as are all things that are good and pure. Then as he moves on in it, Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. As-salam is the word for peace, but it's got all kinds of elements of comfort, security, sanctity rooted in it. You probably heard Muslim people greet people in this way. Assalamu alaikum. The response, wa alaikum assalam. And in this is embedded also a principle. It's not necessarily taken only from this, but if somebody teaches you how to greet somebody as we are taught to greet, this is an actual prayer you're making for someone. So when you say assalamu alaikum, you're saying peace be upon you. And the notion is that you want to respond with what is equivalent or better. So the response would be wa alaikum assalam, right? Or wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. And if someone says to you assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, they're saying may peace be upon you and the rahmah of Allah, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you could respond wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, or you can add another layer to it. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, right? If you guys like to watch comedians, there's a Muslim comedian by the name of Mo Amer. He's a really funny guy. And I've known him for a while. He's also really great. He's got a bit in one of his shows where he talks about how Arabic as a language is so much different from English probably not appropriate like segment, because then he talks about like bad words in English versus in Arabic. So let's pretend like I'm not telling you to listen to that part. But when he starts off the piece in his show, he starts to talk about how like Arabs when they greet you, or Muslims when they greet you, they'll say, may the peace of the divine be upon you. And the person will respond, may the peace of the divine be upon you and his mercy. And the person will respond, may the peace of the divine be upon you and his mercy and his blessing. And he says in English, they just say to you like, hi, right? And then that's it, But you're literally making a prayer for the individual, right? And in this context, this as-salam is alayka. The kaf here is in reference to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So, may peace be upon you. Ayyuhan Nabi means, O Nabi. There's two words in Arabic that refer to a messenger of God and a prophet of God that you'll come across a lot. One is Nabi, and the other is Rasul. A Nabi is a prophet, a Rasul is a messenger. The difference between the two is not always so complex, but it's got like a little bit more detailed of a conversation to it. But the Arabic here, Nabi, is taken from potentially a couple of different roots, right? In Arabic, if you have the root naba, it's denoting like really important news. So not just news, but like super important news, right? And the Nabi is the one that's delivering the naba. So they're giving this really important news. Does that make sense? You also have a different root structure that denotes something that is elevated and protruding. So it gives the idea that a prophet in Islam is a little bit different from other religious traditions, is just an individual who has like good character. Their sense of ethics, their values is something that is very pristine. And the sense of being elevated isn't that they're necessarily separate or inaccessible, but they're people to look up to in that sense. So, the peace be upon you, O Prophet. Oh, and there's a translation right here. Peace be upon you, O Prophet. Wa rahmatullah, and the mercy of God. Rahma is not just mercy, right? And this is hard because in the society we live in, right, it's a very inequitous society, supremacist society, anti-black society. When you think about mercy, it's quite often kind of thought about in relation to justice, right? In that sense, do you know? And Sharia isn't a system that is about like do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, getting fines. I crossed a red light, I'm going to get a ticket. That's not what it is. Rahma is not mercy in that way, because Rahma has its own element of love to it. It has an element of softness to it. It has an element of gentleness to it, an element of compassion to it, as well as an element of mercy to it. And here is being said, may all of that be upon you from God. Wa barakatuhu, and his blessings. Right? Barakah is like blessing, but it's essentially, if we were to kind of give it a definition, it's the ability to do more with less, right? Like you could do more with time because there's blessing in your time, right? You could do more with the food that you have. Many people could eat from one dish because there's more blessing in it. It's got also an element of longevity to it. And that's what's being said here in the second part. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And then at the end it says, Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi salihin. That may the peace not be just upon you, but may the peace be upon like us. Wa ala, and upon ibad, the servants of Allah, as-salihin, the ones that are good and righteous. The word ibad in Arabic is the plural of the word abd. that can only refer to individuals who are servants of God. You have another plural in Arabic of the word abd that is abid, that can just refer to servants in general. But ibad is only used in reference to servants of God in a plural sense. You're an abd, right? Like we have the word Abdullah, Abdurrahman, like these are names, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? Like the servant of God. But in its base definition, someone is an abd because it relies on something for its existence. So when we talked about the first chapter, Surah Fatiha, we talked about this a lot because there's a verse that says, Rabb al-Alameen, like the Lord of the worlds. And God is uniquely Rabb because he is self-sufficient. And everything in existence, creation, is abd because everything relies on something to exist. Like you need oxygen to be, right? You need sleep to replenish yourself. You need food to nourish yourself. We could go through a whole list. In an Islamic understanding of the divine theologically, God is the only one that is self-sufficient, does not rely on anything for existence. And this is where there's an essential difference in the understanding of monotheism in Islam in comparison to other religious traditions. And so when you say the word ibad of Allah, it's giving a notion of like many individuals. And this is just kind of a customary thing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that when something is done in particular for him, he always brings everybody else into that blessing also. The two categories here that are being brought in is alayna, because when you pray, you're going to say it exactly like this. When I pray, I say it exactly like this. So this ibad Allah salihin is a very specific segment. Someone is salih, they're righteous, when they have like all of their stuff together, The opposite of this is fasad, which is just like corruption, chaos. Being righteous in Islam isn't that you're like self-righteous, and you're kind of looking down on people and condescending, but it's about doing the right thing also at the right time. Like everything has elements of appropriateness to it, These are things that are not just, let me throw words at people, for example. Like there's a verse in the Quran that says, وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا, like say words that are good. In Arabic, when you hit a bullseye with an arrow, that's something that's sadid, right? Like the arrow hit its target. So the word to hit its target is that it's the right word in the right order at the right time, And there's some people, you talk to them, you're like, what is this dude talking about? Like some of you right now, that's what you're thinking. I don't understand a word this man is saying, right? And that's fine, But in this sense, that's the arrangement of this thing of this very particular group of people that they are related to God in servitude through this qualification that they're doing things in the ways that they're supposed to get done. And when you pair alayna with that group, it means that some of us who are not good people like me are also being prayed for because we're not in that category of people who do everything at the time and the place and the ways, like they have like their stuff together, right? They're not in chaos. Do you get what I'm saying? Right? So peace be upon us as well as people who they're the ones who are in the world that they're just putting goodness into the world. They're the ones that that even when someone else is there, they're going to be doing the right thing always. They're living with a very God-centric worldview. They're not putting qualifications on like how it is that they do what's right. They just do what's right, simply what's, it's the right thing to do. That first part is not a breaking point, but it's a statement that has these three sentences to it. And you want to memorize that because it's a necessary act in the prayer, in the sitting portion of it. At-tahiyatu lillahi was-salawatu wat-tayyibatu. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi salihin. You just learn it word by word, right? Take your time with it. And you say it to yourself a few times in a day. I don't know what this website is. It's just the first one that popped up. But it's got like some seemingly kind of audio file to it. And it's 49 seconds long, right? So in a day, you could listen to this like 5 times in less than 5 minutes, right? That's all it takes. And as you listen to it, you just repeat the words, and you start to build a relationship with it. But you want to build it with a sense of meaning. I'm in this part of my prayer, and I'm sending like majestic greetings to the divine. And giving an insight that everything of my daily prayers and all of the things that come from me that are just categorically good, all of that is only for God. And then embedded in this is a prayer for the Prophet Muhammad. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabi wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. And you can see it in a direct relation to the first part. So there's greetings for God, and then there's greetings of God to the Prophet. There is, my prayers are going for you, God, and God is saying that the compassion, the mercy, the love, the gentleness, the kindness of God is going upon you. And the goodness, the purity of all of my actions, everything is for you, and my blessings are for you, is what God is saying. And then all of that is being embodied into, well, let's make all of those things for everybody, as well as people who are good. Embedded in this also is an idea that at every minute of the day, there's a Muslim person praying somewhere. It's not meant to be something clever. That's just how it is. There's 2 billion of us in the world, right? And our prayers are based off of a cyclical pattern of the sun. So the prayer windows are starting at a different minute, pretty much, of the day at every point in time. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. This is when you pray your 2 rakat, you're saying this one, but on the last 2 rakat you're praying, the tahiyat is longer.
There's other parts to it,
Yeah.
but we're breaking down the prayer based off of what's obligatory, fard, what's necessary, wajib, and what's sunnah, recommended.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're going through it piece by piece so that people have a process to learning it. Because what most people get from Muslims who might not be aware of like the different kind of pedagogy to teach it is like the final end result only. Like in your prayer, here's like a laundry list of everything you have to do. And that can be very overwhelming for someone who is new to prayer, new to Islam. And for us, like, you don't have to know these things to do it. You don't have to know why the prayer is prayed in the way it is in order to pray. But if you're going to either be teaching someone how to pray or you're learning it for yourself, there's a process that allows for you to still have a certain ease to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So one of the things that's also in here embedded is a sense of like working towards something, right? If pretty much right now, like there's at least one person praying this, they're saying this someplace in the world, likely, right? If not many more. And there's going to be people doing this at all hours of the day and the night because of time zone differences and whatever else, right? Somebody in Malaysia is awake while you're asleep. Somebody, while you're sleeping, is praying in the same time zone as you. So embedded in this, just like in the first part, is an idea of like good etiquette. In this last part, there's also the idea that I want to be in this group of people. I want to be in the ibadallah salihin. I want to be from amongst those who are considered the righteous servants of God, so that when all those people are praying for the good people, like they're praying for me too. Do you get what I'm saying? And it creates now a momentum that says, when I live my days and I'm making decisions and making choices, and people who don't even know my name are making a prayer 5 times a day, in those prayers, multiple times in some of the prayers, every single person who's doing this, every time they pray, they're praying for, like, potentially me, if I embody the characteristics of those who are considered to be righteous. Do you get what I mean? And so the person who is salih, the person who is here, the salihin, the person who is righteous, as you're starting to narrow down, like, what are those things, right? And you can read from the standpoint of Islamic ethics, because it's not a religion that is just about ritual, but it doesn't divorce, it puts together religion, spirituality, ethics. All of those things make Islam. And you just ponder and reflect upon this as well, that if I'm trying to create a definition for me that isn't just about people who do X, Y, or Z, because a person from a Muslim standpoint who's righteous is not somebody who's only praying and only fasting and doing this. A lot of it is about how you treat people. A lot of it is how you use, like, the spiritual gifts that were given to you by the divine in the ways that he intends for it, right? Gratitude, appreciation, these kinds of things. But you can also understand what something is by knowing what it's not. So could somebody say, regardless of their faith, that lying is a good thing to do, that being deceitful is a good thing to do, that breaking a promise is a good thing to do, that gossiping is a good thing to do? Could somebody say, I can't definitively say it, but I want to, as I say these words in every prayer, I'm also mindful and aware of the meaning of it, that if I'm saying them, somebody else is saying them, and I want to be in that group that somebody's praying for. So how can I be in that group if I'm racist? Do you get what I mean? How can I be in that group if I look down at people because they come from a certain social class or a certain country of origin, or they have an accent when they talk, or any of these things? Do you get what I mean? So just like part number 1 is giving us a sense of etiquette, this last part is also giving you something aspirational that says, hey, I want to be in that group that theoretically millions of people at any given moment of the day are praying for people in that group of individuals. So make sure, like, your neighbor has food and they're not hungry, right? Ask people how they're doing, and don't pretend like you don't. You're just asking, but you really don't care. Like, actually care. Do you know what I mean? Right? Yeah.
But how would you say about, like, if you're very, very sick, you can't even go up on the bed, and you have the Isha left to pray. How would you say about that? Like, God will punish you for that if you don't pray the last praying?
You pray within your means. So if you can't get up to pray, right, you do the physical motions that you're capable of. If you can't even do that, like my father, I've said this to people in the class before, he had a bad stroke 6 years ago. He's paralyzed on the right side of his body. He can't speak. And he prays without making the physical movements and motions. He can't make wudu regularly. So he does something that we haven't talked about in this class yet. Probably talk about at some point in the fall. It's called tayammum, where you use, like, dust to kind of go through the motions, etc. But it's very individualized. There's 5 daily prayers, and you pray your daily prayers. But where you have physical limitations, you do things in their capacity as best as you can. And so here, that's like what we have going on. So when you're in this sitting position, it's really easy, especially, it might not seem like it because languages are different, right? But it's easy once you memorize things to stop thinking about the meaning of things, right? To not necessarily be so kind of ingrained in what is it that I'm actually saying when I'm saying these words, right? And so this is what you're doing in the sitting position. These are not just greetings, right? But I am extending with a sense of etiquette a set of majestic salutations towards the divine, and understanding and affirming for myself that everything that I am doing, I'm only a worshiper of God, like not anything else. Does it make sense? And extends through it. So now when we get to the latter part of it, we're not going to talk today about kind of positions and postures that are happening, because you might see some people, right? Like my kids are little. They're not so much anymore, mashallah. My son is 7, my daughter is 10, but like they're not like, but they're still like not 2 years old. But when they're 3 or 4 or 5 years old and they come and sit next to me while we're praying, you'll see Muslim people when they're doing this, on their right hand that is on their right knee, they'll do some variation of movement with their finger, right? We're not going to talk about that today, but it's attached to this. My kids, they don't know what's going on. So at one point, my kids had like their hands up like this, and I was like, "What are you doing, man?" My kids are cute, right? I like them, but my son, he's like going like this, right? I don't even know what he's doing, and I was like, "Hey, man, like what?" Because especially when it was really little, Kareem, we'd be praying, and he can't sit still, so he's like shaking all around. Sometimes he's like slapping my butt. There's times when like I'm prostrated and he like literally leans over and kisses me on my cheek, right? Super cute. But I'm like, bro, I'm trying to pray to God right now. Like the whole point is to not be distracted by things. And so he's sitting next to me, he's going like this, right? And even his sister has got like all kinds of like things. I'm like, what are y'all doing, right? And they're like, well, we saw you put up 1. And I was like, okay. And they were like, we thought it's better if we put up more than 1, right? And I was like, I guess that makes sense. But also, that's not how it works, right? And so what people are doing when they're putting their finger up, like we'll talk about that in a little, like in the next class. But that's as part of this. And there's different ways that people do that. They're all acceptable, right? They all have a basis to them. Some of it looks different because of understandings of language. Not because there's different bases, like different kind of text, but what the text means and how they're interpreting, like the wording of the text is a little bit different, right? Here now in the latter part, which is from here, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his slave and his messenger. So the word ashhadu, it is a verb that means I bear witness, right? And that witnessing is something that you're doing in your entirety, but it's got an element also that's attached to vision. Like in Arabic, if I said I'm watching TV, I'll say ushahid telfaz, right? It's got the same kind of, right? I'm seeing the TV. So you're bearing witness with that kind of vision invoked, right? So I am bearing witness to this. An la, that this la means no in Arabic. Sorry, I keep pointing to the Arabic. This la means no. That's how you like negate something, right? Or you say no if someone asks you hal, etc., etc. You can say na'am, yes, or la, no. But in this context, this is like a really powerful no. It's saying like there's nothing, complete negation. Whatever is going to come after it, it's saying that none of that is there. Does that make sense? So I am testifying, I'm witnessing that there is la ilaha, that there is no God. There's nothing that one worships. It's complete negation in that la. I testify that there is nothing that exists that is worthy of worship. And then it puts in the illa, So, ashhadu an la ilaha illa, except. And the exception now creates the extreme opposite, that you have absolute negation that bridges into absolute affirmation. So there's nothing in this room that I, enjoy except, and then that one thing is that much more defined, right? I could say, I like, a red marker. Versus if I say, I don't like any markers except a red marker. Like, do you see how the language is different? And then I say, I bear witness that I don't like any markers except the red marker. It's denoting like a certain level of kind of emphasis. Illa Allah, except Allah, wa ashhadu, and I bear witness, anna, that Muhammad, abduhu is his servant, wa rasuluhu, and his messenger. So some of the things that are happening in the language here, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. In the first part, you have an. Ashhadu an la. And here you have ashhadu anna Muhammadan. The an versus anna, like anna and an, it means the same thing, but the anna is denoting more of an emphasis. And why there's more of an emphasis in the second part than the first is the language is a little bit different already. You already have an emphasis from ashhadu and the an, and then this complete negation and the complete affirmation. And the anna is in a place where it doesn't have those other elements that are there. Muhammad is the name of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it means the praised one in Arabic. And there's a lot of different ways that people will utilize, like just even the naming of the Prophet is an indication of kind of certain things. There's more people named Muhammad in the world than anything. There's all kinds of prayers we'll talk about going forward, like what you say after this in the sitting that includes a specific prayer for the Prophet Muhammad and his family, the Prophet Abraham and his family. But there's a constant sense of kind of elevation. And so that name means the one who is praised. Abduhu is his servant and his messenger, is also giving people a reminder that Muhammad is the praised one. We testify to his being a messenger, but he's also still an abd of God. He is an abd, and we have the ibad, like the plural of abd. So you're a human, and your prophet is a human. Your prophet is not deified in Islam. The only thing that is worthy of worship in Islam is God. And that's what's being said again and again and again in this prayer. I'm affirming that I bear witness that he's a messenger of God, but he's still also a servant of God. Does that make sense? And it becomes a point of distinction in comparison to other religious traditions. There's a chapter in the Quran, it's called Al-An'am. It has a verse that it says very explicitly, you don't mock people's religious beliefs, right? Where there's differences in people's perspectives, etc. As a Muslim, you're taught that there's no reason. You don't denigrate anybody's beliefs. You don't ridicule them for what they believe in. That's not something that Islam teaches you to do. It's in the Quran. And one of the reasons that it says it is because you're going to go mock somebody's belief in God, then they're going to just mock yours. Like, don't get upset. Somebody, you mistreat them. Why wouldn't they mistreat you? But here is something that is being said in every single prayer, that I only worship God. Allah is the only thing worthy of my worship, and that Muhammad is God's messenger and his servant. Does that make sense? You're going to say something?
No, I'm saying
Yeah?
yeah. I was just saying, yeah, you're right.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. That works out well, because it's been bad for the other way. And so we're saying this as a necessary act in every prayer. In the sitting position, the posture where you're on your knees, and this is called the tashahhud. Does anybody have any questions on this? Can everyone follow along with what I was talking about? Yeah. So what you want to do, the same way we did with the first chapter of the Quran, and we broke down every word and what its meaning was, a little bit more deliberately. A lot of these words are the same. And many of these words, like the meanings of them we've talked about before, so we don't have to kind of elongate the conversation too much. But we want to memorize this and start to practice it. So all you gotta do is, like, once a day, just sit down. In the morning, say, like, the first part to it, the first few words. And say it like 5 times, 10 times before you go to bed, right? Once you'll get into the habit of it, you'll see when you're walking on the street, you'll be saying it to yourself, repeating things, and trying it at your best. It has to be said in the prayer in the Arabic. There's some, like, exceptions made in the broader sense of things in certain parts of prayers, but fundamentally, like, if we're following this rubric, there's not a lot of Arabic you are required as an obligation to say, right? In this part of the obligations that we still have written here, like, you're only required as an obligation to say any short verse of the Quran, which we said the shortest verse of the Quran in it was thumma nadhar, and then he looked, right? That could be the only thing you say in Arabic in the entirety of the prayer, and it meets the obligations. The necessary components are different from that, and those are things we're working on right now, right? So you want to start to work on what we were just talking about, which is this, the tashahhud, which is done in each sitting of the prayer, and start to memorize that part to it also. Yeah.
When you're praying with other people, is it more important to, like, be alone in terms of the movements and positions, or, like, saying everything
When you're praying with other people, meaning someone is, like, leading the prayer, then you want to follow the person leading the prayer and move at the pace that they're moving in, right? So in the Hanafi school, which is what we're studying, the person leading the prayer, essentially their prayer is, like, kind of what is qualitatively, like, literally leading everybody else in prayer, and you're following them in that sense of the word. If you're going to lead people in prayer, right, in a community like ours, I had this conversation with somebody which was very eye-opening to me, right? Somebody's learning their prayer, and it happened, like, years ago also, and it reminded me of it, where there was a young woman who was in our community. She was new to Islam, her prayer, and we all prayed, and she came up to me afterwards, and she was, like, in tears, and I said, "What's going on?" She was like, "I just can't keep up with everybody," which is an important thing to know, right? Like, in the prophetic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad would keep his prayer short sometimes when he would hear a baby crying because he didn't want the mother to be distressed, or there's elders in it. But you also, like, recognize who is part of your congregation and community, and somebody is, like, new to prayer in and of itself and trying to get the whole thing done, then, it might be a reason to kind of do it a little slower, than kind of faster. Does that make sense? Yeah. But when you're following somebody in prayer, your prayer is going to count. You're following them in the movements of the prayer, so you just kind of go at it at the pace, and as you do it, you'll get more accustomed to it. Yeah. Okay. So what we want to do is, if people have those whiteboards that Kiara got for us, if you don't have a whiteboard with you, there's still some up here. If you don't want to use a whiteboard, you don't have to. But we'll go through some of the letters again and kind of review some of what we did before. Yeah. You can come and sneak up, don't worry. Yeah.
That's good. You might have hit on this before, but what's the nuance between obligatory and necessary? Not as in the prayers, but as in the prayers.
Something is deemed obligatory if it has text that is definitive, and the meaning of the text is definitive also. And where the necessary is interjected in the Hanafi school, as well as like on the other end of the spectrum, there's like strictly prohibited, haram, and then they have disliked, what's called makruh, but they break it into two categories. A makruh tahrimi, it's got like the word haram in it, so closer to haram, and a makruh tanzihi, which is a little less disliked, is where text can have potentially more probabilistic meaning to it. And within that, they're very hesitant in saying something is like definitively obligatory or definitively impermissible unless it's very clear that that's what it is, right? Because their attempts are not to be done to kind of elevate oneself. They're trying to do what they believe is what God wants them to do, you know? So, you know, we are making a claim that this is what God is saying is obligatory. So when you're reading the Quran, it says don't eat pork. There's not really any ways around that, right? Because it just says don't eat pork, do you know? The mandate of like 5 daily prayers, these kinds of things. But then when you look at some of the narrations on it, nobody disputes that there's 5 daily prayers, but there's different opinions on what are the start and end times of those windows potentially, you know? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so I studied the Hanafi school of fiqh, but also just from the standpoint of like a class for new Muslims and converts and these kinds of things. You know, the mode in which prayer is broken down also creates like a little bit of an ease to it, so that one doesn't have to be super overwhelmed or feel like I need to know everything, you know, from day one, because that's not even possible. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
From my understanding, the tashahhud is also, it was at one point in time a conversation between Allah and the Prophet in the seventh heaven.
Yeah, there's some people who say that there's this journey that's called the Isra and Miraj. The Prophet goes from his home to Jerusalem and then is taken to the heavens. What most people say is that when you kind of look into text to see where there are chains of transmission, like associated with some of these reports, that it's a little bit hard to find those things. So they don't know like what it's based in like fully. And the tashahhud that we just went through, in the hadith literature, you'll find 5 different versions of it. And in some of the different schools of thought, just the content of it, right? Each of them is valid. And different schools will sometimes emphasize one over the other based off of the methodology that they use. So for example, there's one that instead of it saying, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله, it'll say أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله, right? And it's valid. There's another that, you know, this one said التحيات لله والصلوات والطيبات. There's one that says التحيات مباركات صلوات طيبات لله, right? So the lillah is at the end, and it puts all of these other terms in the beginning and adds in Mubarak, and there's no wa in between. So it's not saying like the greetings are for God and prayers and all things good, but it's saying greetings, like, you know, blessings, prayer, and good things are for Allah, right? And you think about this in a sentence, right? If I said to you, I have markers and a microphone and a table, right? And it's giving a delineation of a list. But if I said to you, I have, I don't know, what's something that can be like 2 separate words, but also combined into like one apparatus? Does that make sense? Do you get what I mean? You do get what I mean? What do I mean?
Mac and cheese.
Huh?
Mac and cheese.
Yeah, if I have macaroni, no, because it has the word and in it, right? So it's got to not have the word and in it, you know?
Chalkboard.
Huh?
Like chalkboard.
Yeah, if I have chalk and I have a board. Amazing, thank you. If I have chalk and I have a board, I can say I have chalk and a board. But if I say I have chalkboard, right? You see the difference in the kind of, the semantics are not just semantics. Do you know it's denoting something else, right? Or like in the version we looked at that says at-tahiyatu lillah, that it's saying like these greetings are for God and prayers and this, right? So if I say I like mac and cheese and also like, you know, candy and donuts, right? The more the emphasis is coming on the first part of it, that I've defined it. But if I say, like, you know, so here it says greetings are for God and prayers and things that are good. But in this other version, it says, you know, the greetings and the blessings. But it says greetings, blessings, prayers, pure things are for God, right? The language is different. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense, right? And that's what a lot of people will do. They'll look at the language and they'll reflect on it. Like, what is it evoking, right? They're all, though, based in various narrations that are taught in different ways. We just looked at it in one way. And you might come across people. What you don't want to have is, like, somebody comes to you and you say to them, like, hey, this is how I learned it. And they say, this is how I learned it. And you're like, well, you're wrong, right? Which is what happens with a lot of people. They become very myopic. Islam as a religion is not rooted in this kind of set of just black and white that is somehow definitively rigid, that everybody's going to do everything exactly the same way all the time. And that principle is applicable in so many other ways. The idea of being Muslim is to not remove your innate sense of identity, but to enhance who you are, right? Like a lot of people, when they convert to Islam, it becomes hard because the people that they talk to are trying to turn them into like an Arab Muslim or a South Asian Muslim. There's nothing wrong with being that, right? My family is South Asian, but that means I'm not Irish, you know? But you can be Irish and be Muslim. You're not converting to Pakistani like you're converting to Islam, you know? Right? Do you know what I mean? So that's like embedded in some of these principles also. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this instance is something that when people look at the journey of Isra and Miraj, they're deriving it from like the conversation that comes principally, but as like a kind of reported narration, there's not something that exists in text that many people will find that has like a chain of transmission to it. And that's where they'll say there's like a, to qualify it in that way becomes a little bit. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, after like many weeks, if you remember when we talk about Arabic as a language, you want to conceptualize letters in relation to this like line that exists. And there's letters that are above a line, there's letters that are below a line, there's letters that will kind of be like in between the line, right? And we'll review really quickly the 4 letters that we did last time. Every letter is going to have like, you know, its original form, and then it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end form. Because the letters are not separate, right? Like the way my name is Khalid, and in just regular print, like that's how it is. I don't even know if I remember how to like write fully in script. Oh my God. I just try to think how to write my name in script, and how do is that right?
You mean like cursive?
Yeah.
No, it's an no.
This is my last name, Latif.
Oh.
Khalid Latif. Right? The letters all connect to each other. Do you know what I mean? That's how Arabic works. The letters fundamentally, like, they connect to each other, right? And so you're going to have a beginning form, a middle form, and an end form. And in a lot of the letters, are the other letters from like a script standpoint. So some letters will not connect to the left. It's written right to left because if you connected them, then they would look like another letter. Does that make sense? So like in Arabic, the letter for la is a lam, and the letter for a is an alif that looks like this. So when you collect lam to the left, like this says Allah. It's a alif, a lam, and a ha. If the alif connected from the left, it would just look like another lam, right? So it distinguishes the letters. Does that make sense? You'll get used to it, but this is where, like, as an exercise, you want to commit to, as we learn the letters, what I ask people to do is open up a Quran. You can go on a website and just start to identify the letters. If you don't want to do it with a Quran, just look up anything that's in Arabic and just start looking at the letters and circling the ones that we're going over. So you start to build a relationship with them visually, and you start to also practice like writing them, because it'll feel amazing as we go through it when you can actually just start reading through the Quran very fluidly, you know. And altogether, it shouldn't take so long, and this will be a consistent part of what we're doing in the class also. Okay. So to review really quickly, the first letter we're going to look at is called alif, right? This is an alif. And in Arabic, it's very similar to the letter A in English. And generically, every word, every letter in Arabic, there's no like letters that are vowels as such, right? You have vowel markings that we'll talk about, but what they yield is a pronunciation that is essentially in like three modes of pronunciation: an a, an e, or an u sound, right? So every letter is going to have this a, e, u. And as you're pronouncing it, you want to over exaggerate, because you're going to then be able to be more accustomed to pronouncing it more instinctively the way it's meant to be, if you're just comfortable like opening your mouth. So don't think how ridiculous you sound, or look, right? Because you don't want to say like right? Because then you're going to say like ah, right? Like open your mouth and say ah, so that as you do that expressively, it's going to get you to a place that when you're like reading, you're not then swallowing letters, because you learned them in this exaggerated way or emphatic way. And then as it becomes more instinctive, you're still prone to pronouncing the way that it's meant to be. Does that make sense? Yeah? I don't know. People just like nod their heads. Yeah? Oh. So Aleph is just a straight line. And it doesn't connect from the left. And it's above this line that we're talking about. Do you know? So it doesn't go below the line. Make sense so far? So in the beginning of a word, Aleph is going to still just be a straight line. It doesn't connect from that side. If it's in the middle, it's going to connect and still maintain its entirety of a letter. And in the end, it's going to also be the same. Does that make sense? You sure? Yeah. So
it's a placement of the letter.
These are the placement of a letter in the word. So if it's the first letter in a word, then it's like this, right? If it's in the middle of a word or at the end of a word, like then it's going to be like this. Does that make sense? Yeah. Or, I mean, beginning, middle, and end are generic, and we'll talk about it as you see more words, right? But like if there's a letter that's not connecting, the next letter takes on like its beginning form. Does that make sense? No? Great. Yeah, go ahead.
So when this is being read, like in a word, it says all the words that we learned in prayer, I've never heard the sound aleph, or the word aleph. So
It's an Arabic letter. So it's named Aleph in Arabic.
okay.
That's what the letter is called. It's an Aleph.
It's like how in A is A, so we say A.
Or W.
So it's just a name.
Oh.
W.
Yeah, like W is wa, right? Like Z is a Z sound. X is like, what sound is X? You know, right? Yeah. Like, there you go, right? Do you know what I mean? So we have like also, like it's normal to us because we grow up in a curriculum that utilizes this. But if you try to explain the letter X to somebody who speaks Arabic, like what would you tell them? How does it work? Why is excitement, but xylophone is xylophone? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do those things make sense? So all languages have kind of their like intricacies to them. And with this, it's its own language, right? But it's got an alphabet. And so there's a cognate in English. The alif is similar to like the letter A. Does it make sense? And we'll do this in terms of vowel markings really quick, and we'll kind of go back to it. So you have 3 basic vowel markings. We'll use the letter alif. If there's a line and a diagonal above it, this is called a fatha, and it makes a ah sound, like one syllable, ah. If the line is below it, it's called a kasra, and it makes a e sound. And if you have this kind of symbol on the top that is not like this line or that line, that's called a dhamma. That makes a oo sound. In the Quran, they have these markings in like printed Arabic. You won't always find them in Arabic as a language. They're not always like using it. People just recognize words. The way that when you read a sentence, you've like learned the word, right? You know book. You can just see it, book, you know, and it's book. Somebody will know like the word without the vowel markings. In the Quran, when you open it, it's going to have the vowel markings as a mechanism to help people who are not native Arabic speakers, who don't know the language, these kinds of things, to pronunciate the way that it's supposed to be pronounced. So these are like the 3 kind of base vowel markings, and we'll add each week like other kind of punctuation, other markings that come in, so that you know you're familiar with them. But for now, let's do these 3. So alif is just going to look like a straight line, and if it's the first letter, it's going to just be this way. It doesn't connect from the left. Does that make sense? Yeah? And, you know, if you're writing a word, you're going to start from the top and just come down. Okay. The next letter, we're going to go through a bunch of these today.
Sorry, can you repeat the fatha sounds again?
Yeah, so the fatha is a. This makes a ah sound. This makes a e sound. And this makes a oo sound. So with the letter alif, it would be a, e, u, right? Like a is like in the sound cat, right? E, you know, oo. Yeah, one syllable. Okay, the next letter is a ba. This is like the letter B. Ba is going to look like a little boat, and it's going to have a dot underneath it. Ba is much closer to the line, right? It's like a shorter thing. So you have alif and ba. That's how ba relates to an alif. Does it make sense? So ba is going to always be distinguished by this dot that's underneath it. Because there's a bunch of letters that are going to look like this, and they're going to have a different number of dots. Similar to these vowel markings, the original like Arabic of the Quran, it didn't have also these dots underneath it. So, for example, the word for house in Arabic is bait. And if you write it out, it looks like this. These are 3 different letters. The ba has 1 dot, the ya has 2 dots below, and the ta has 2 dots above. What it would look like back in the day is just like that. But somebody would just know that that's what the word bait looks like, you know? So, could be much harder, right? Right? So, in the beginning, ba is going to keep the first half of its shape. So you're essentially making the boat, but keeping it in half. And what people call this is like a tooth. So it's got one tooth, right? And then you're putting the dot. That's how you know it's a ba. In the middle, it's going to maintain also, it's got its tooth, and there's a ba. And at the end, it's going to retain its entire shape. So it connects, and it's the entirety of the letter. Does it make sense? Yeah? Everybody good with that? So the ba is similar to the letter B. So if you want to repeat after me with those three kind of pronunciations, ba, B, boo. Right? Simple, right? Yeah. So you're going to look for just the dot below. That's going to tell you it's a ba. Good? Yeah?
And that will have the same punctuation, the marks on top. You know, if it's
Every letter has the same punctuation marks. Yeah. There's a fatha, kasra, and a dhamma. And then next week, I'll tell you 3 other pronunciation marks, like vowel markings that you'll have. Right? That we'll have like 2 of these, you know? And that's called fathatain, kasratain. And it just adds like an N at the end of it, an un. And this is like an indefinite word versus like if it doesn't have it, if it's just one, it's definite. So it's the difference between like the book and a book. Does it make sense? But don't worry about that right now. We just want to get used to the letters. So the next letter is a ta, and that's similar to the letter T. So it's the 3rd letter in the Arabic alphabet. It's a ta, right? So it's not kind of aligned with the English alphabet, you know? It's its own alphabet. So it's going in its own kind of order that doesn't match up letter for letter. So the next letter doesn't sound similar to the letter C, right? So we went from a, ba, now we're going to ta. And ta is shaped just like ba in all of its positions, except it's got 2 dots above. Does that make sense? In the Quran, it's going to always have 2 dots. If you read like a newspaper or something else, if you decide to engage a different type of Arabic text, what the 2 dots might end up being replaced with is, instead of like that, or even in script when people are writing, they'll make like a straight line as if they've connected the 2 dots. Does that make sense? But in the Quran, you're going to always see it as 2 dots. Right, the same way you have like script, people are writing, you know, they're going a little bit faster, and they're connecting things. So the ta is going to be noted with 2 dots, right? So if you repeat after me, ta, t, 2. Okay. Then the 4th letter is a tha, and it's like the English word theta. Right, so you want to like be conscious of where your mouth is going organically, where your tongue is placed as you're pronouncing these things, right? So when you say tha, as in theta, your tongue should be going to the top part of your mouth, right? It's not going at the bottom. You can't say it tha, right? Because it won't work. Tha, right? You could say ba like that. When I say ba, my tongue is not at the roof of my mouth, blah, right? That doesn't work. I don't even know what that was, blah. But it's ba, and the tongue is resting at the bottom. With tha, you're bringing it up to the top. So the tha in theta has you go against the roof of your mouth with your tongue. Theta, right? So can people say theta? Yeah, can everybody say it? Theta? Not just like 1 people, 2 people. Can every person in the room? Can we say theta? Theta. Theta, right? So where's your tongue going? Yeah, there we go. So tha, so you repeat after me. So this tha is going to be distinct from the ta. It's going to have 3 dots, kind of like a triangular shape. Tha. Right, so if you say tha, thi, thu, right? Tha, thi, thu. Yep. And on each one, your tongue is hitting the top of your mouth, right? Tha, thi, thu. Tha, thi, thu. Right? Yeah. Great. So what I'd asked people to do like a month and a half ago, which nobody did, but now you all will do it before next week, is those first 4 letters. Just get into the habit. You can take your whiteboard home and play around with it. Can you put yours up? Look how nice Gisbelle's whiteboard looks. Amazing, mashallah. Yeah, great. So if you take your whiteboards home and practice, and all you want to do is make nonsense words. You don't have to worry about whether they're actual words or not, right? But the 4 letters we just did, alif, ba, ta, tha, you connect them to each other in 3-letter words. So make alif the first letter, ba the second, and ta the third. Make ba the first letter, alif the second letter, and ta the third. Do you get what I mean? Just every combination that you could think of. Mess around with it so you're getting used to writing and seeing what it looks like. Because if I had alif first and ba and ta, it would look like this. Right? If I had ba first and then alif and then ta, it would look like that. Right? If I had ba, ta, and tha, do you see what I mean? That's all we want you to do. Right? You don't have to care. Is it an actual word? Is it not a word? You know? And the nice thing with the whiteboards is that you can erase it and then just keep doing it again and again and again. And you don't have to worry about like having these large notebooks filled with kind of random like script. And it's just about being able to first recognize the letter and how they relate to other letters. We're not trying to make you like calligraphists in this class, right? You just want to get to a place where you're recognizing the letter and then seeing how it fits with other letters, how it connects. Does that make sense? And then if you want to, you can just say it with like these other like letters on it, like the pronunciations, right? So, batatha, right? Abata. Do you know what I mean? But you don't even have to do that. Just as an exercise, start writing it and like connecting the letters. See how that goes. Does it make sense? Okay. So we're going to do 3 more. And all of the 4 letters that we just did right now, they're all above this line that we have. Or actually, maybe we should just stop and not do all like 7. Yeah, I want to be conscious of people's time. So we're going to do the next, we'll do the next 7 letters next week. So bring the whiteboards with you. If you don't want to take them home, just put them in the box and put the markers in the marker bag and the eraser in the eraser bag. But you should take them home. They're for you, right? Kiara got them for everybody who's in the back. And they're really great to be able to utilize. But just literally, it's not like you got to spend an hour doing it. You know what I mean? Like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you'll be surprised. And then the second part to it that you want to do is pull up like on a website, open up like a copy of the Quran that's in Arabic. Just start looking for those 4 letters, right? In the first chapter, Surah Fatiha, like we've gone through it in detail. Look at that chapter. Like where do you see the letter Alif? Where do you see the letter Ba? Where do you see the letter Ta? Where do you see the letter Tha, right? Maybe it's not there. Maybe it's there. It's not like a trick question. And then just move on to the next page, right? Do you see any of those things? So you can start visualizing it and building a relationship with it. And then we'll go through all of the letters within the next like 3-4 weeks and start to do some other kind of drills and exercises with them so we can like compare. Because some of the letters, they're going to sound similar, right? Like there's a letter that's like our letter S, seen, and it's like a sa sound. But then there's also a letter that we don't have a cognate of that's a slod. right? So it's like a fuller mouth, right? Like the word seesaw, right? Is kind of, you can hear the difference. One you're saying with like a more lighter sound, and one is with a heavier sound, right? So seesaw, right? Or there's ta that we just did, and then there's a letter that's called ta, right? It's just about how you position your mouth and kind of being able to recognize the letters. But we'll pick up from there next week. So we'll do the letters first, and then one of the other necessary acts in the prayer that we discussed last week was, along with the first chapter of the Quran, that you're reading either one long verse or 3 short verses of the Quran. So we're going to look at like 2 short chapters of the Quran that are like really short that most people memorize. One is called Surah Kawthar, and one is called Surah Ikhlas. Kawthar means like a multitude of blessings. It's also a fountain that's said to be given to the Prophet Muhammad on the Day of Judgment. And Ikhlas means sincerity. So if you want to look it up in terms of like the English, the chapters in like the books that you have, that would be great. But we'll go through those in the next 7 letters. So we're just chipping away at like the necessary acts. Okay, great. So we'll see everybody next Wednesday. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're inspired by the work that we're doing at the IC and want to help keep it going, subscribe to our podcasts, follow us on social media, donate to help support us at ICNYU.org, and most importantly, keep us in your continued du'as. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.